Salut Christel, guten Tag. Good to see you. We're really glad to have Christel with us. And I just want to do a short presentation and quickly give the floor to Christel so that we stay on time. We are really good on time right now. So we have a lot of good time to discuss together. Christel Ngnambi is an author, lecturer, and teacher based in Düsseldorf in Germany and in Brussels in Belgium, where he's been for a long time already. And he's trained as a political scientist, as myself. He worked for 12 years as an analyst and then as a representative to the European Union for an international Protestant association in the fields of human rights, poverty, migration, and the environment. And so all this diversity of fields led him to intersect the themes and ideas of convictions, social issues, political issues, and existential questions. Today, Christel offers his services as a consultant in strategic and political communication. In 2019, short publicity he has in his presentation as well. I think he contributed 3 very important chapters, in my opinion, in the book, Is God a Populist? So we're really in the midst of our discussions of populism, church, and even God himself. It was a book published in Norway, and I enjoyed reading it very much because it contains a lot of good insights. And I just learned a couple of days ago that you now even can download it for free on isgodapopulist.com. So, Christel, we are really, really happy to have you here, and we are thankful for your presence and your insight you'll share with us. And we're looking forward to your keynote now that is titled Populism in Society, Tasty or Tasteless, an Attempt of Understanding. So, Christel, thank you again, and the floor is yours for the next half an hour.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind words of introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you. I will spend about 25-30 minutes giving an overview of what is, I believe, a very large topic, which is also the reason for much confusion, tension, debate, emotions, negative words, as the word clouds has shown. We tend to associate that topic with negative words. And I think, for anything, it's good to try and bring a little bit of thought and wisdom into the topic. Now, as was mentioned, a book was written around that topic, which deals more with the connection between Christianity, appeal to religion and God, and populism. We try to approach it from various angles, also from various countries in Europe. And this could be a week-long seminar, and even after a week, we will not have exhausted the topic. So all I can do now is scratch the surface a little bit with you, hoping that at the end of our time together, there will be a slightly better grasp or better understanding of the topic of populism. And what's great is that this academy gives you the opportunity to discuss the topic and bring it a little bit deeper and closer to your own reality, and start thinking about how each and everyone can address that topic in our own context. So on for our presentation, I just need to share my screen for a second. The title of this seminar is Populism in Society, Tasty or Tasteless, an Attempt at Understanding. And of course, already from the title, you understand this sort of double perspective of things that are tasty, things that are tasteless. I actually like the reference to one of our 5 senses. What is it that we like and has a good taste? And what is it in populism that we should not appreciate? There's also an implication there, which is that there are some things that are tasty in populism. So let us look at this, and I just want to connect to the fact that the issue of populism is a current issue. So a recent article which I read in Foreign Affairs magazine, which is a magazine dealing with foreign affairs, international affairs, underlined this, that to understand how populism is evolving in the era of COVID-19, is to shine a light on the problems facing the world's democracies. Already just in this sentence, there are a few ideas. Populism is an evolving phenomenon. It has been impacted by COVID-19, and it points to certain problems facing the world's democracies. And democracy is often a concept that is pitched against populism. So somehow populism is in tension with democracy. And what I suggest that we do is to try and begin to answer this question, right? Is populism really a threat to democracy? And I'll try just to pitch that tension by telling you a story, actually two stories, which both happening in one city, the city of Paris in France. The first scene that we discover is in a hot summer day, a very hot summer day indeed, in the month of July, mid-July, 1789, the 17th of July, 1789. The atmosphere was electric at Place de Grève, which is nearing the town hall of Paris, still the capital of the Kingdom of France. The atmosphere was electric. King Louis XIV was the 16th was summoned to the town hall. About 200,000 people saw him arrive with his suite coming from Versailles, his palace, protected by a metal vault to prevent from attacks. 3 mornings earlier, the fortress of the Bastille was attacked and successfully taken by an army of the common folk, shoemakers, wine merchants, sizzlers, attacked a symbol of royal might, a building which had never been attacked successfully in 400 years. The common folk managed to attack this symbol of royal might. The king and the monarchy, which had symbolized the people and France, was put into question. So as King Louis arrived at Place de Grève, he was summoned by the National Assembly, a self-elected assembly of the people, representing the people, and had to obey the order of coming and being heard by the representatives of the people. As the king arrived, the cry of the people was no longer the traditional "Vive le roi," long live the king, which would acclaim him everywhere he went, but "Vive la nation," long live the nation. So the seat of power had shifted from a traditional institution, which was highly respected, the monarchy, symbolized in one person, the king, to something a bit more abstract, the nation, represented by one different institution, the National Assembly, which was there to represent the will of the people. Summer of 1789. Fast forward to another scene in Paris, April 2019. Another hotel, a private hotel, Hotel Le Bristol, a famous and expensive hotel in Paris, was a hot day as well, of early April, and another figure was standing there. Steve Bannon, who was the advisor to Donald Trump. He was the architect of the election of Donald Trump, but then was fired a few months into Donald Trump's presidency. Came here to broadcast his ideas about democracy and the failures of democracy. Steve Bannon introduces himself as a populist, proudly wears the title populist, and he is there to ignite what he calls a populist revolt. Why a populist revolt? because he believes, and as he says that, he's convinced that he is representing the sentiments of the people. He believes that the traditional democratic system has failed the people, that the common folk have been betrayed by the elites, and that people who trusted in the system and worked hard and obeyed the rules were betrayed, starting from the crisis of the subprimes at the end of the 2000s, and in the following years, this was the one too many hit to the people. So Steve Bannon was there as part of a tour of Europe to explain that the time had come for a revolt of the peoples of Europe, a populist revolt. Now, Steve Bannon is often presented as being himself, as well as his movement, a danger to democracy. In the first scene, in 1789, there was another American in Paris, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States and the drafters of the Constitution of a new democratic nation, the United States of America, commented on the events in Paris that this was a dangerous scene that he had never seen before, more dangerous than even what had happened in America. So, a democratic revolt at the end of the 18th century, which proposed the end of the Ancien Régime, the end of monarchy in France and in many other nations in the centuries that have followed, is presented as a dangerous phenomenon. And in 2019, another American, broadcasting his thoughts about politics in Europe, he is himself presented as the herald of a dangerous movement, a revolt of the people. What is really the danger there? What is really the danger? So I would like us to look at the realities of populism and basically from two angles, because that's the way I believe the best approach to populism is to see it as a double phenomenon. Populism is not simply a political ideology. It has been defined, and I think the word cloud we have seen is really a reflection of that, and that's a dictionary definition, as a set of political ideas and activities that are intended to get the support of ordinary people, again, ordinary people, by giving them what they want or by exciting people's emotions rather than having good ideas. Again, populism, we need to say it, populism is a negative term. It is a pejorative term. It is not generally a term that politicians or leaders would claim for themselves. It has been identified as a contemptuous slur, like an insult which is used to decry things that we do not like. But I think we need to have, especially as thinkers, leaders, and Christians, a more refined approach to what populism is. Populism is both a situation of distrust, a social phenomenon, and a large-scale social phenomenon. It is a reality that we experience, and that's what I call populism as experienced. And it is also a narrative. It's a way of telling a story to make sense of that situation of distrust. A narrative of redemption, where thought leaders and politicians will seek to redeem the situation. So let's talk about that situation of distrust, because I think that is an underlooked and understudied or underconsidered part of the reality of populism, because the term populism is a pejorative one, and we associate it often with certain leaders or opinion shapers. We forget that it is responding or replying or trying to address a reality, a reality which is experienced by literally dozens of millions of citizens in Europe. There's a communication firm, an American communication firm called the Edelman Trust, and they have been publishing for the past, I believe, the past 20 years, a barometer of trust, and they call it Edelman Trust Barometer. And in that study, they evaluate levels of trust in various nations in the world. And the nice thing is that it gives a year-on-year comparison basis. Well, for the last several years, the trend has been a general trend of lack of trust, of distrust. The numbers for 2021 show that government and media are the least trusted institutions, lower than NGOs and businesses. The government is perceived as fairly unethical and grossly incompetent. And we need to approach this under the light of the management of the pandemic. This is what people are saying. And in their mind, they also have the management of the pandemic. And the government and media have only about 50% of the public's trust. Or in other words, when you ask about 100 people, do you trust these institutions? About 50% of the people will say yes, and the other half will say no, I don't trust them, roughly speaking. That number has been roughly the same over the past 5 years at least, with slight fluctuations, but that's a reality. Another observation that we can make is from the Eurobarometer, which is a survey conducted by a service which is attached to the European Commission and asks regularly questions to European citizens about a variety of themes. And sometimes these questions have to do with trust in a variety of institutions. In 2018, the Eurobarometer found that government and institutions have 60% of the distrust in many countries of the European Union. Now, not all of the countries, there are some exceptions. So in the Scandinavian countries, for instance, famously, levels of trust are higher. But distrust is 60%, right, in a big number of countries in the European Union. About 50% of trust levels are in for the European Union, which is interesting. You would have thought that the EU had less trust than national governments. No, it's the other way around. There are, generally speaking, higher levels of trust in the respect for human rights in our nations. So what we can see is levels of distrust in representative institutions. And then lastly, what we can observe is that distrust is systemic and existential. You have a breakdown of social relationships. That's what social psychologists have been observing generally in the Western world. A loss of meaning, concerns about the future. And what's interesting about the concerns about the future is that they are higher in the younger generations. The younger generations have less hope about the future than the older ones, which shows that there is a basis of distrust, including in the younger generations, and therefore a greater response to this populism as experience, this situation of distrust. And then feelings of abandonment and helplessness. So it is more than just saying, I do not trust the institutions, I do not trust the law. It is more than something about rules and the mechanisms of how the state works. It is much bigger than that. It is social. A study showed that in the OECD, so developed countries generally, about 10 to 15% of the population would say that if a catastrophe happens in their life, they have literally no one else to turn to, right? If they lost their income, their house, their family, they would have no one to turn to. No family, no friends. And that's an indicator of social brokenness. And I think it is interesting to look at populism from that angle, because what we find is that populism is a revealer of the spiritual and psychological state of the populations of Europe. Now, briefly, let's look at populism from the other standpoint, which is populism described more as a narrative of redemption. This is the populist storytelling as performed by political entrepreneurs, political party leaders, politicians, but also civil society movements. This is not only about politicians. This is a narrative about power centered on the core concept of sovereignty. And it deals with our desire for agency, our desire to change things. That story describes the world as it was in the past, the world as it is no longer, so the brokenness in the world as it should be, and the populists would portray themselves as the heroes of the story. So basically, this is the diagram of the populist narrative. So you have the populist, the people who is the center of the story. The people knows who they are. The people is always dignified. The people's expression is always clear. The people has a very clear and monolithic identity. And they have enemies. The enemies of the people are the elites, and the elites can be institutional, they can be economic, they can be cultural, they can be legal, can be administrative, they can be financial, the elites. And the elites have interests which are opposed to the interests of the people. The role of the populace is to give back sovereignty to the people because they deserve it, and they are the true heroes. And the problem is also that in that story is that the elites have joint interests with other people in the population, which are foreigners. And depending on the political ideology of the political party, the profile of these others is different. There's a nice German word for that, Feindbild. Feindbild means like the portrait of the enemy. And that's in the populist narrative, a lot of it has to do with drawing the portrait of who the enemy is in society by various games of language. The populist politics has to do with polarization. That's really the key factor of the populist narrative. Polarization, antagonism within society, majoritarianism, meaning that whenever the majority is spoken, the will of the people is clear, and that leaves little space for dissenting voices, for minorities. And that's really the antithesis of liberal democracy, which does make place for minority voices, for dissenting views. And authoritarianism, meaning my way or the highway. You do it as I claim it, because that's the best approach. We do not need complex institutions. We do not need complex negotiations. We don't need expertise, subcontracting. Let's ask the people have spoken, and the authoritative leader will execute the will of the people. The will of the people is transparent, it's very clear. So why have all these complex systems? But one thing's for sure, there's a lot of empathy in the way the populists speak, because they do speak to the feelings of the people. Otherwise, populists would not be popular. And populists are popular. Now, I could say a lot more around that, because that is a portrayal of really how populist politics have functioned so far. I need to underline that populism exists on the political right and on the political left. Now, right-wing populism has been more popular over the past 20 years, but left-wing populist parties in a number of countries have made some inroads, and that's what experts are observing as well. And we can talk a little more about that if you want. A few words about Christianity in populist discourse. The first point is that Christianity is the trellis on which the vine of populism grows effectively. I don't know whether you've got a garden, but if you're growing a vine or tomatoes, you need a support for the plant to grow well. Okay, so populism is a type of narrative much more than it is an ideology. You know, political scientists say that it is a weak ideology because it doesn't have strong concepts in and of itself. It needs other things to be convincing. And Christianity has proven an efficient trellis on which the vine of populism can grow. In one of the chapters of the book, I look at left-wing political parties in Venezuela, famously with Hugo Chavez, who had this rousing speech on a populist speech, which referred directly to Christianity, explaining that Jesus is the leader of the people, and that basically his politics are the politics of Jesus, literally, and you know, cursing the leaders of the Catholic Church in that same speech. But also in the Netherlands, the Dutch Socialist Party has referred to Christianity. In France, La France Insoumise, or insubordinate France, has made references to it. But on the right, very famously, Salvini or Orban are famous leaders who famously use symbols and language and concepts from Christianity to convey their ideas and show that their politics is better than the other parties. So Christianity is a trellis. It's also an identity, a twofold identity, an identity of refuge against perceived decline of the state, of state authority, decline of traditions and modes of life, which were there in the past, a decline of social welfare, which is a very important aspect of things. And then secondly, an identity of defense generally about Islam, against Islam. And that's, I would say 90% of the anti-Islamic rhetoric stems from the right wing, but you do also see that on the left from time to time. Again, you know, I'm opening boxes and I do not really have the time to discuss them, but I just wanted to mention that. And then I'll finish with that point. The fact is that we must, especially as people involved in our churches, we must have a complex approach to populism. Why? Because polarization is a real thing and it can arise from anywhere. And we have the role of, you know, watchers. Our calling is for a calling towards reconciliation. And what is reconciliation if not the undoing of polarization? It can arise from anywhere and it can arise all the time, and we are all prone to it. Christians are not an exception, and our countries are not immunized or vaccinated against populism. Then practicing Christians in many countries tend to be less prone to populist narratives. That's what we have observed. It does not mean that they're not prone to them, but they tend to be less prone to them. It seems that they tend to resonate more with the populist situation. And that's where I believe the role of the church is, engagement with the populist situation. Why is it that countless people around us have lost trust in their societies, feel threatened by decline, have animosity against their neighbors or fellow citizens? Why is that? Why is there so much brokenness? Brokenness of identity, brokenness of social bonds, and looming conflict. And the third point there is that Christians, they do include a wide range of views and positions in the populist situation. You find left-wing Christians, right-wing Christians, center Christians, Christians who do not know what their political affiliation is, more practicing Christians, less practicing Christians, Christians who are closer to the institutions of their churches, Christians who are further away from the institutions of their churches, but who do, all of them, share a common identity, a common commitment to Christ and to his message, and can find together the language to address the populist situation from various standpoints. I don't think that there's any people or institution in Europe nowadays that has the power and potential to address the populist situation as the church does, especially through the means of a better story. We can tell a better story. We can provide meaning and joy to our various communities in Europe. And I believe that that's the gigantic challenge we have, but the church is equipped for it, at least partly. And it has been for 2,000 years. Okay, let me finish here by thanking you. Maybe just a couple of things. If you want to access the book, Is God a Populist? I believe that Matthias or the team can share the link. It is freely accessible online. You can even download the PDF. And I'm actually looking forward for more discussion because, as I said, I just touched a number of issues and we can go deeper. So I'm looking forward to your questions, to your challenges as well. If there are things that you disagree with, it's more than welcome, because I believe it's through dialogue and the confrontation of ideas that the light can shine through. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Christel. I need to find my clapping hands, my virtual clapping hands, when I can clap like this as well. Yeah, thank you so much for your insights and this, I think for most of us, fresh view on populism, and really focusing also on our role as Christians. And we have quite some time for the questions and remarks. So we have one here with the most votes so far. Which is nice, the popularity of populism, like the positive elements. What are the positive sides of populism? Martin Luther King was a populist. Ooh la la. All right. So this is like a practical approach to another definition of populism. Christel, maybe you kick us off in the discussion with this one. This is quite a nice question. You're still muted, Christel.
Apologies. It is a nice remark, and I think in a certain sense, it is understandable to say that leaders like Martin Luther King were populists in the style, maybe not in the sort of brash, taboo-breaking, politically incorrect approach to things, because he was famously very intelligent in the way he used his language, and his work was to make allies and not it was like the contrary of the polarization and antagonizing people. He really did the contrary, and he was known for that. But there are some aspects to it. I think the positive aspects of Christianity, of populism. There are two aspects that I could mention. The first one is one that I've mentioned. It's the empathy, right? I have observed. I've been observing populism in a variety of countries for 5 years, quite intensely now. And I must say that they are the best at communicating and communing with the feelings and impressions and thoughts and existential crises of people. And that is mostly why they're popular, because voters, citizens see in populist storytellers, in populist leaders, they see people who seem to be, if not like them, to be people who really understand their reality. Nowadays, lots of people do not really find themselves in the traditional sort of left-right political axis. and these leaders, they step away from that by speaking more about people's impressions, and sadly, a number of things that are false, than placing themselves in the traditional way of practicing politics and political debates. So this aspect of empathy is really a strength they have. The worrying thing, according to me, is that we don't, and surprising thing to me, is that we don't really see as much power to empathize with the populations in other leaders. And then, well, the second thing also of populism is that through the political leaders, like populist political leaders, their storytelling, we actually, and the tension and questions that it raises, we actually have an opportunity to look at the reality behind the story. And that's what I call the populist situation, or populism as experienced. Experts and observers have asked themselves the question, why are they popular? And that's how you understand that social brokenness, loneliness, alienation, atomization, neoliberalism, and other things like that have had a gigantic social impact on our populations, which might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for the impact that the populists have had. So they were good in that they've been like a signal of alert, and have pushed a number of observers to look more precisely at the realities behind the stories which are told. So we understand much better the populist situation as a social phenomenon now. And it also shows us that it's not only something that is fought against by proper elections or proper language. It is a social malady. It is a social disease that we all are called to address where we are through our leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Christel. We will come back later, I hope, to the social brokenness. We have a question for this, but I'll follow suit what I promised, that we see like how the race is going, and we have now a new top answer, which is as follows. There are many different definitions and models of what populism is. We know. How should we deal with this diversity of understandings and the resulting fuzziness? Yeah, nice word for this term. Yeah. I don't know if you can have a brief answer to this huge question.
Yeah. It is a big question. So two things I would say. The fuzziness is there. It is just by definition. So, and I wouldn't say fuzziness per se, but it's, as I said, populism is often presented as a weak ideology. As such, if I say socialism, and like you studied politics a little bit, or you're just an average citizen, you have a rough idea of what socialists stand for. Or conservatives, you have a rough idea of what conservatives stand for. If I say populists, there isn't like an ideology of populism, because populism is more a technique and a narrative than it is a political ideology. And so the confusing thing is, because we've talked about political parties and left and right for so long, when we talk about populism, we may get the impression, okay, that's another ideology in the spectrum from left to right. No, it's a different thing altogether. It's not a political ideology per se, but, and that's the second part of my answer, we can deal with that diversity by looking at the commonalities between various populist leaders and movements. And that's what I've tried to summarize in my presentation, and I say more in the book, and other co-authors in the book do the same. It is a mode of communications, and you see it mostly in news commentary when politicians speak, in viral videos online. So like YouTube and other media have become like a great multiplier of populist views, and keep that sort of the structure of the narrative. Wherever you see the speaker speaking against elites which have betrayed the people, with the support of others in society, and the others that we should dislike are the elites and these others. Well, I mean, you have high chances that this is a populist narrative. Now, depending on the ideology, the content of this may change a little bit. So the left-wing populists will attack the elites, and the others, the bad people in society, would maybe be arch conservative people, for instance, or wealthy business owners, right? So that's the other in society. Right-wing populism, the elites will be the traditional elites, the global elites, and the others will be the immigrant, the Muslims, the refugee. So the way the characters in this story are painted will vary according to the ideology of the political ideology, but the mechanism is the same. So wherever you find that mechanism, you have a populist rhetoric.
Thank you very much, Christel. You just mentioned Muslims as like the picture of the enemy, usually from the right-wing populist movements. What about populism in Muslim countries? Like here's the example of Turkey, which is suffering under populist politics.
Yes, well, that varies a lot according to the country itself. I believe that the populism you find in Turkey is heavily influenced by the history of the nation itself. So it's not merely a matter of religion per se, but it's something you find in former empires. You do find that in Russia, for instance, a kind of connection with a past which is seen as a bygone past and a glorious past that we should get to, and that's the element which I mentioned, right? The populist comes here and tries to connect with a feeling of decline that the people have, and in Turkey you have this impression that for about 100 years the nation has culturally been in decline, and that we should return to that glorious past while embracing modernity at the same time. Now, how you do that is, what Erdogan's party is trying to figure out, of course. But there, the enemy seems to be people who associate with Western ideals, or the fact of rejoining the European Union, for instance. These are the secular people in Turkey are the Feindbild, right? They are the ones that are targeted by populist narrative. For a long time, there was like a proper religious aspect to it. One which is still there is the glory of the Islamic Caliphate. You definitely find that in transforming secularized spaces back into mosques or religious places, and Hagia Sophia is like an illustrious example of that. And also a kind of hateful discourse against Christian institutions or Christian people be it the historic churches, Christian churches in Turkey, or what they call the missionaries, which for a long time was depicted as an enemy, like in school material, which would be like contemporary Christians or actual missionaries who go to Turkey to introduce the gospel to Turks. But that, I would say, like the hate against Christians is less of a powerful tool in the populist narrative as the return back to the caliphate.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so we'll just keep on going. The next one, I heard a call for Christian action against the social brokenness you were talking about, and how do we help to heal? This is a big question but that's what I also heard, like from the loss of social relationships, the loss of meaning. It's a huge task actually for Christians and churches, isn't it?
Yes. And I mean, I'm glad that you're asking me the question, but I suppose that we all understand this is our task.
Yeah.
But I can help and provide some pointers. This was really like a big revelation to me as I studied the realities behind populism, is that what we're facing is really a widespread social crisis. And by social crisis, it's not... an existential crisis, a crisis in society. And so one thing that I could point out, and I mentioned that in my small group just before we joined, is I read a very interesting book recently by an American anthropologist. Her name is Edith Turner. And she published a book titled Communitas, The Anthropology of Collective Joy. I'll just write it down. Edith Turner, and the book is Communitas. It's a book from 2012. I guess with these details you can find it back. I hope you can see that. Yeah. So she looks at the subtitle of the book is The Anthropology of Collective Joy. And she looks at what makes community bind together, have stronger social ties, and face adverse circumstances. It's a wonderful book. She looks at various societies across the world, and quite interestingly, where applicable, of course, the church is in its many expressions is often present there. It's often a vehicle of providing resilience in times of social crisis. And one thing that she underlines for which she underlines the power of collective joy is that when movements like the church create community, they provide spiritual unity. Now it's a secular kind of spirituality, right? But it's a kind of more closeness between people who would otherwise be different and have different interests. And they do that by supporting people, or being present, bringing a story to make sense of the situations that people are going through. So there's the storytelling aspect, but there's another aspect which is called, which she calls integrative customs. So integrative customs are things that you practice regularly, but bring people together, especially people who have various conflicting interests, and in sort of monocultural cultures, it's very obvious. It's often the traditional festivals of one culture will bring people together, and in spaces that are monocultural, we tend to forget that in the past, these spaces were less monocultural, and then that it's been the power of these integrative customs to bring people together. And things that are as modern as a football match have this power of bringing joy and bringing people together. But the thing is that in our individualistic society, we tend to limit ourselves to the events themselves, and forget that we are part of a wider social fabric. So what kinds of events, what kinds of rhythms, what kinds of celebrations, what kinds of opportunities to think together, to sometimes disagree together, can we create in our own environments? Are we generously welcoming voices that are different to our own voice? Are we making space for our fellow believer who comes to church quite regularly but supports a right-wing party and is vocal on Facebook about it, right? Do we create a space where conversation can be articulated? Because the point is not really to fight arguments against arguments, but to find commonality, to find a connection, to help people also voice what is in them, and things which people externalize as support for populist leaders could be turned in a much more productive fashion if individuals or institutions create the spaces to bring people back together, including and especially people who we do not spontaneously associate with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christel. That was also like a really short introduction to our community tables, because this will be our aim as well. So not to find a consensus, but really have a dialogue and learn from each other. Well, so maybe we can have a last question now, and the other questions, we can take them along for the community tables, especially today, maybe even tomorrow, so it won't be lost. Thank you for everybody who participated here. The next one says, thank you again, Christel. Very interesting, helpful presentation. I need to look at your book. Yeah, you're free to do so. It is interesting to me that you mentioned both left-wing and right-wing populism, but how are these different? That could also be a long presentation again. I mean, you mentioned a bit of it. I don't know if you can say briefly add on it.
Yes. Left-wing populist parties tend to be less effective than right-wing populist parties. That's one thing you can observe in terms of their impact in society. They're also, the left-wing populist parties are more attached to socialist ideologies, political ideologies, whereas the right-wing populist parties tend to be more attached to actually nativist ideology, which stands outside traditional conservatism, to be frank. So nativism is the idea according to which the authority in one given nation should give explicit advantage to those who are considered to be native of that place. So that provides much more potential for polarization between those who are considered as native and those who are not. Whereas in left-wing populist parties, because of the connection to socialist ideology, and the socialist ideology is itself internationalist, they would tend to have a much more sort of international way of thinking. So the problem to them is neoliberal globalization, which it also is actually for right-wing populists, I need to say, but it's closer to the socialist critique. A critique of the financial powers in particular. And also the polarization in society it's harder in the socialist, like with socialist ideas, to have xenophobic language just because of the nature of socialism, which is internationalist. in its kind. So they will turn to other enemies to point the finger at, like people who destroy the enlightened heritage of our nation is the kind of logic you'll find in France, for instance, against arch-conservative people. So being a populist, I mean, let me put it that way. This is my appreciation, right? This is Christel speaking. What I've observed is that it's harder to be coherent as a populist if you stem from a left-wing party than from a right-wing party. Just because nativism is naturally polarizing, it is much easier to be a right-wing populist. I mean, it's just more coherent with the background ideology. And then one last thing to differentiate them: nativism or right-wing populism will appeal much more to culture and heritage and traditions and things of that sort, and religion, Christianity definitely. Whereas left-wing populism will have a bit more of a socio-economic, materialist, of course, socialist approach to its social critique, and the narrative will be more, materialist. It will not so much deal with culture or things of that sort.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we all deserve a break, but I would just propose, like, for the next 1 or 2 minutes to have a quick look at the questions we couldn't answer yet, but so we can take them with us in the different sessions, because maybe there are other people that, like me, didn't have the time to look at all the questions. So very briefly, Christel doesn't have to answer them in 10 seconds, just to take them with us. Has the internet contributed to the spread of populism? What about the next coming artificial intelligence? Okay, this is a huge question we really can't answer right now. Does populism not exist in societies that practice surreal or fake democracy and claim they have their own style way of democracy? Would be an interesting idea we can also take with us for the community tables. Christian virtue is united in diversity under God's love. But the answer Christianity gives is kind of populistic answer. Follow Jesus or follow Christ. Easy answer to a complex question. Wow, that's quite a theological question. I just leave you another one. Is the access of information contributing to populism somehow? Yeah, that would also be an interesting question to see how visible also populistic and other arguments can be on social media or anti-social media, whatever you want to call it. Oh, now I've clicked the wrong button, and maybe briefly it can go down again. Bear another minute with me, please. So what about the relationship between populism and democracy? Is it just part of it? Talked about it, I think, and we can continue this discussion today and tomorrow. How can we take action against as Christians, as we don't have a standing as legitimate partner anymore in society? Wow. Okay. We could do that if this is the case, and if not, and how we can be part of civil society. I mean, I hear there that we're not the dominant part, but if we're legitimate or not, we could discuss also at the community tables.
Good question.
What would be the next, the connection between populism and the ever-present hyper-individualism related to wokeism? Okay, that's different layers we'd have there. We really don't have the time now, but maybe today and tomorrow later on. And if populism is a necessary part of democracy, it's also interesting. Should we first have a dialogue among ourselves as Christians? We are diverse, right? Or right away take part in society's discussions. I think we could do both, but it's really important not only to go to the outside. I mean, I think a lot of us have the tendency to save the world, but we have to start with ourselves. That would be my short answer to this one, if you allow me. What about racism and other prejudice that are fueled by and fed into populist narratives? You could say a little bit about that before, so thank you for this. We had the abstract, the other, and the enemy in your presentation. Populism is behavior and attitude. Every political party wants populism or not. Okay. And the 3 last questions, thanks for bearing with me, but I was just too interested in reading them. Is it true that political parties want to win the elections? If it is true, then can we say that all political parties are populists because populism want to win the people, the voters? Okay. And again, I put up the wrong one. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm slipping in the presentation. Last try. All right. And can you give examples of left-wing populists? You did, I think, quite some. I mean, Hugo Chavez is one of the most popular or known ones, and you added something in your last question as well. And the last one is populism, a typical movement for a secularized, laicistic society, lack of meaning, search for spirituality, search for a redeemer, search for exclusive community. You described this also a bit. I mean, we could deepen this further. So thanks again for bearing with me for these questions. But I thought it was important to really keep them with us, because otherwise you'd have to use your break to read up on the questions. And so we shared this.
Brilliant questions, by the way.
Yeah, so I can stop sharing the screen. Sorry that we only could answer the most popular ones as voted. Maybe it was a populist way of moderating this session as well. But the people have spoken, I could say. So thank you so much, Christel. I mean, you're really invited if you have some time to stay a little longer with us. I don't know if you have the time. And thank you so much for your insight, the inspiration you brought to the table and the tables we will have after the break.